Today, more January 6th, because I believe it is the defining event of U.S. politics in this century so far. Specifically, the release of the final report from United States Special Prosecutor Jack Smith this week. Jack Smith was working on a case involving 4 federal charges against Donald Trump. The exact details of the charges really aren't important. They revolved around interfering with elections and government processes. And the details really aren't important now because of Donald Trump's re-election. Following norms and rules and all that good government stuff, the stuff Trump routinely ignores, attacks, and/or disparages, Smith wound down his prosecution of a soon-to-be re-sitting president. Trump was going to fire him anyway, so there's that too. Okay. The charges covered Trump's schemes to overturn the 2020 election and his actions around the attack on the Capitol on January 6, 2021. There are also a half dozen unnamed co-conspirators in the report, by the way. He couldn't do this alone, after all. He's not that smart or focused. We actually know who they are through circumstantial evidence. I'll put a link to a guide in the show notes. In this final report, honestly, there wasn't much new if you follow this closely. And I have. And that's not normal. More on that in a bit. But because I know that most people do not follow this closely, and that it all likely seems like a fuzzy blur, let me try to spell things out clearly. First, some context. Recall that well before the election, Trump wouldn't commit to accepting the election results or a peaceful transfer of power. Anything short of his winning would be, by definition, considered rigged. So, when he did lose, his supporters were primed. He got his day in court, he brought numerous lawsuits, and they were all rejected. He then got rolling 3 schemes that Trump engaged in to overthrow the election. Scheme 1, pressuring state officials to change the results. Trump and his co-conspirators contacted Republican elected officials and elections officials in several states to just flat out get them to overturn the elections there. It was a full-on pressure campaign to convince them to accept the election fraud lie and act on it. The most famous one was in Georgia, where Trump was caught on tape pressuring officials there to, quote, find 11,780 votes. Every time, and to their credit, these officials pushed back. Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, they all pushed back, saying the elections in those states were legitimate. These officials even went so far as to ask for solid evidence of fraud, but of course, it never came because it didn't exist. Scheme B, recruiting fake electors. As you probably know, we have a little thing called the Electoral College. The votes you and I cast get converted into people known as electors. Each state gets electors. They actually cast the final vote for president. Normally, they just affirm what you and I chose. But Trump and his co-conspirators saw an opportunity there. January 6th is the date, by law, when the final presidential vote is declared legit. This happens when Congress and the vice president count the electoral votes. But what if you can throw that normal process into chaos? That was the plan. Trump and his retinue recruited officials in the various states to act as alternate electors. They lied to these people to get them to agree to it, by the way. They told them, hey, we'll only need you once those other state officials from Scheme 1 get around to overturning the results. You'll then be the legit electors. That was the original plan. But it morphed from there. After lining up these fake electors, they then planned to send the legitimate and fake elector votes to Congress on January 6th. From there, chaos would ensue. And as we all know, chaos is a ladder. Integral to this extension of the plan was a pressure campaign on Vice President Mike Pence. As VP, he had a largely ceremonial role on January 6th, basically just accepting the electoral votes. Trump and his team instead wanted him to say the fake electors were creating doubt and that the whole thing should be thrown back to the states or maybe even eventually to Congress. Yet again, chaos, doubt, delay. Pence, to his credit, resisted the plan and for his trouble had people calling for him to be hanged. Scheme the third. As if pressuring state officials to just change the results And deceiving people into becoming fake electors wasn't enough. Trump tried to rope in the U.S. Justice Department. You know, the folks tasked with actually upholding the law in the U.S. Trump wanted Justice Department officials to come out and say that the election was bogus. Those officials refused. This went on, with Trump wanting them to publicly cast doubt on the election, and they're refusing. They kept saying they didn't see any evidence of widespread fraud that would overturn the election. That is not what Trump wanted to hear. The pressure continued. Trump finally got to the point where he was willing to can all of the top officials at the Justice Department and install a willing accomplice that he had found. There was an intense meeting in which those officials said, if you do that, everyone will resign. Basically, my read, the whole thing would come out. Trump backed down. The Justice Department would not be lying for him. So, a months-long disinformation campaign combined with 3 concrete schemes, an extended, sophisticated information and legal fraud, all for him to stay in power, built on lies that Trump knew to be lies. Smith has a whole section on the number of times that Trump was told by state officials, lawyers, everybody, people on his staff, people on his campaign, and yet he went on to lie about a rigged, stolen election. Actually, he does that to this day. People, these things happened. The lies, the schemes. We have gobs and gobs of evidence. It's real. Read the Jack Smith report. Read the January 6th Select Committee report. Shove off delusional diehard election and January 6th deniers. I refuse to concede truth to the fragile ego wishes of one man. And I will not forget or forgive an attack on our capital, on our country, born out of all of this despicable nonsense. 3 more thoughts. In his final report, Smith emphasizes the threats to the safety of the prosecutors, witnesses, and their families. This is a movement built on the threat of political violence. The attack on the Capitol proved it. And anyone opposing Trump should take those threats seriously. Also, for what it's worth, Smith said in the report that he was confident he would have won the case. That made all the headlines when the report came out. But of course, now we'll never know because the case is gone with Trump's reelection. And finally, and related back to that, most Americans just don't seem to care. They've moved on. What to make of that? I think we have to break down who has moved on and why. There are the cultists, the Trump is Jesus types. They'll believe whatever he says, all other evidence be damned. Then there are the operators. These are the people who think they can use the cult to achieve their ends. I'd put Steve Bannon and Elon Musk and the tech bros, I would put them all into that category. It's all a means to an end. Then there are the Republican hangers-on and climbers. These are the cowards, the Republicans who know better but won't say it. Out of fear for their jobs and position, screw these people. Then there are the team Republicans, lifelong party types, who root for the jersey regardless of what it represents. Then there are the time-starved Americans. I'm actually sympathetic to these folks. If they follow politics at all, it's mostly noise, and if political elites seem to be divided on something, like whether January 6th and the re-elected president's schemes to overthrow an election were bad, well, then it just must be a big nothing burger. Finally, I guess there are what are called double haters, the people who are of a mind to say a pox on both their houses, who see everything as corrupt, that it's all just equal, as if precipitating an attack on our nation is just one more thing that happened. That's just sad. Well, regardless, the nation will now move on. There won't be any legal accountability for Trump or his co-conspirators. No political accountability, no voter or public sanctions. Just victory. Good luck, America.